When my son told me he needed some space, I smiled instead of crying. I don't know why I smiled. Maybe because I didn't want him to see how much those words hurt me. Maybe because I had spent most of my life pretending everything was fine, even when it wasn't. He stood by the doorway that evening, his jacket half-zipped, eyes not meeting mine. Behind him, his wife waited in the car, the engine running. It was getting dark, and the smell of rain drifted in through the open door. He said it gently, as if kindness could soften the blow. "Mom, maybe it's better if you take a little break. You've been living here with us for so long, maybe you could stay with Aunt Rose for a while." A break, he called it. But a mother knows when a break means goodbye. I nodded. I told him it was all right, that I understood. And when he kissed my cheek before leaving, I smiled again. That same small, tired smile I had used all my life. When the car drove off, the silence in the house grew heavy. I could still see the light fading from the front window, the shadows stretching across the wooden floor. The chair where I used to sit with my grandson's tiny socks in my hands felt colder than ever. That night, I didn't cry. Not because I was strong, but because I had no tears left. Raising my son alone had taken every drop from me. I had given him everything I could, my youth, my sleep, my dreams. I thought love was enough to keep us close forever. But sometimes, love is not loud enough to be heard. So I made myself a cup of tea, the same tea I used to drink when he was a baby, and I stayed up all night with him. The same cup, chipped on the handle, still sitting on the same kitchen counter. I looked out at the empty driveway, the rain washing away his footprints, and I whispered to myself, I raised him alone. And now, I'm alone again. I wasn't always alone. Once, my days were filled with laughter, small, innocent laughter that came from a boy who used to run barefoot across the living room, chasing sunlight through the curtains. His name was Daniel. He had his father's eyes, calm, steady, and full of dreams, but he never got the chance to really know his father. When Daniel was only 3, his father passed away in a car accident. One rainy evening, much like the one when Daniel later left me, life has a way of circling back, sometimes too perfectly, sometimes too cruelly. Back then I was 26, a young widow with a child, a rented house, and more bills than hope. People told me to move in with my parents, but I couldn't. I wanted Daniel to have his own home, even if it was small, even if it was just the 2 of us. So I worked. I took double shifts at the bakery downtown, standing behind the counter from morning until my legs trembled. Flour on my hands, sugar in my hair. That was my perfume for years. When I came home at night, Daniel would already be asleep, his tiny body curled under a blanket that smelled faintly of milk and soap. I used to sit by his bed, watching his chest rise and fall, and I would whisper, "I'm doing my best, my boy. I promise, I'm doing my best." We lived in a small house on Maple Street. The neighbors were kind. Mrs. Thompson next door would sometimes bring over soup when she knew I was too tired to cook. Our lives weren't grand, but they were ours. Simple, peaceful, honest. Daniel grew up surrounded by my love and my worry. Every scraped knee, every fever, every first day of school, I was there, always hovering close, I didn't want him to feel what I felt when I lost his father, that cold, hollow space inside. He was a quiet child, but thoughtful. He'd drop pictures of our little house and say, "Mom, one day I'll build you a big one, with a garden and a swing." And I'd laugh, ruffling his hair. "I don't need a big house, Danny. Just you." But dreams have their own way of growing, like children. When Daniel turned 12, I got promoted to shift manager at the bakery. I started earning enough to buy him a computer, his first one. He used to spend hours learning things online, talking about universities, scholarships, possibilities. He was smart, and he worked hard. I was proud. So proud that sometimes I'd cry quietly in the kitchen while packing his school lunch. By the time he reached college, he had become the kind of young man any mother dreams of. Respectful, focused, gentle. He never raised his voice at me, always kissed my forehead before leaving for classes. When he got accepted into a good university in the city, I told him to go, even though it meant I'd be alone again. I told him, "Don't worry about me. I've been alone before, and I can be alone again." He hugged me so tight that day. "You'll never be alone, Mom. I'll make sure of it." The first few months without him were hard. The house felt too quiet. I started leaving the TV on at night just to fill the silence. He'd call every weekend, telling me about his classes, his friends, the noisy dorms. And then one day, he told me about her. Her name was Emily. Sweet voice, soft laugh. She was studying psychology, and she made Daniel smile in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child. When I met her for the first time, she was polite, shy even. She called me Mrs. Green, even though I told her, "Please, just call me Mom." After Daniel graduated, they moved back to our town. He got a job at a local firm, and they got married in a small ceremony at the community church. I remember the way Daniel looked at her with pure devotion. And I remember standing there, watching them, thinking, he's found someone to love him the way I once did. After the wedding, they asked me to move in with them. Their house was only a few blocks away, modern with white walls and wide windows. I hesitated at first, but Daniel insisted. "You've done everything for me, Mom. Let me take care of you now." So I packed my things, the kettle, the chipped teacup, a few old photographs, and moved into the spare room at the back of their house. At first, it was lovely. Mornings filled with chatter. I'd make breakfast while Emily got ready for work. Daniel would grab his coffee and kiss both of us on the cheek before leaving. We were a little family again, or at least that's what I thought. Sometimes at night, I'd sit on the porch and listen to the wind rustling through the trees. I felt peaceful then, safe. I thought all those lonely years had led to this moment of togetherness. But life has a way of changing quietly. Not with storms or shouting, but with small silences, forgotten words, and looks that last a second too long. And it was in those silences that I began to feel something slipping away. It started so slowly that I almost didn't notice it. The air in the house began to change. The warmth that once filled the kitchen each morning started to feel measured. At first, it was little things. Emily began to make breakfast before I could. She'd smile politely and say, "Oh, Mrs. Green, Mom, you can rest today. I've got it." And I would nod, even though my hands longed to keep busy. Cooking had always been my way of loving, feeding my family
made me feel useful, connected. So when she took over that small act, I told myself it was just kindness. But kindness sometimes feels like a wall, soft, but firm. Daniel didn't notice. He'd rush out to work every morning, still kissing me on the cheek, still calling, "Love you, Mom." And I'd smile, clutching my teacup, pretending everything was the same. Emily was not unkind. She was just careful. She liked her space neat, her routines predictable. She folded the towels in a certain way, kept her spices in alphabetical order, and always preferred quiet evenings with candles instead of TV. At first, I admired her. Then I began to feel like I was walking on eggshells. One evening, I made a casserole, Daniel's favorite, the one I used to make when he was little. When they came home from work, Emily smiled politely, but said, "Oh, you didn't have to cook, Mom. We were planning to order out tonight." Her words were soft, but they landed heavy. Daniel tried to smooth it over, saying, "Hey, come on, let's eat what Mom made." But the meal felt awkward, the air thick with unspoken things. After dinner, I washed the dishes quietly. From the sink, I could see them in the living room, Daniel with his arm around her, laughing softly at something on the TV. I felt like a guest in my own son's home.
The next few months drifted by like that. Small moments that seemed harmless but added up like pebbles in a jar. Tiny, almost weightless, until one day you realize it's heavy enough to carry sorrow. Emily began to change the house. She repainted the kitchen, replaced the curtains, moved my old armchair into the garage to make space. I told myself it was her home now, that she had the right. But when I saw my armchair sitting next to the lawnmower, covered in dust, I felt something tighten in my chest. Daniel didn't see it. Or maybe he did, but he didn't want to. He was busy, promotions at work, long hours, weekend projects. Whenever I tried to talk, he'd say, "Mom, you worry too much. Emily's just trying to make things nice for everyone." And I'd nod, because that's what mothers do. We nod even when our hearts ache. Soft music swells briefly, like memory stirring. One evening, Emily came home late from work. She looked tired, her hair pulled back, her eyes distant. I asked if she wanted tea. She sighed, then said gently, "Mom, I appreciate you offering, but sometimes I just need quiet when I get home. You understand, right?" I smiled. Of course. But after she went upstairs, I stood in the kitchen, holding that chipped teacup again, realizing that even silence can sound loud when you're the only one left downstairs. One Saturday morning, Daniel and Emily had friends over for brunch. I stayed mostly in the background, setting plates, refilling juice, smiling when spoken to. Their friends were nice. Young couples talking about vacations, new cars, house renovations. I listened, trying to keep up, but most of it felt far away from my world. At one point, one of them asked, "So, Mrs. Green, do you live here full time?" Before I could answer, Emily said quickly, "Yes, she's been staying with us for a little while. It's been lovely having her." Staying. That word stung, like I was a guest on borrowed time. After everyone left, I tried to tell Daniel how I felt. "Son," I said softly, "do you think Emily minds me being here?" He looked surprised. "Of course not, Mom. Why would you think that?" I hesitated, then shook my head. "No reason. Just sometimes I feel I'm in the way." He frowned, kissed my forehead, and said,
"You're overthinking again." Maybe I was, but sometimes what hurts most is not being believed. The distance between Emily and me grew without either of us saying much. She started closing the kitchen door when she cooked. She stopped asking me to join them for their weekend walks. And Daniel, caught in between, tried to keep peace by pretending nothing was wrong. One evening, I heard them talking in the living room while I was folding laundry in the hall. Emily's voice was quiet but firm. "She's always here, Daniel. I need some space. It's hard to feel like this is our home." There was a long pause. Then Daniel sighed. "She's my mom, Em. She has nowhere else to go." Those words, "nowhere else to go," pierced deeper than he could ever imagine. Because he was right. I didn't have anywhere else. I had built my entire life around him. Every dream, every sacrifice, all anchored to that boy who once held my hand and said he'd never leave me. That night, I lay awake in the dark, listening to the muffled sounds of their voices from the next room. The laughter I once loved now sounded like a reminder that I didn't belong there anymore. A few days later, I decided to give them space. I started spending my afternoons at the local park, feeding pigeons, sitting on the same bench under a maple tree. Sometimes Daniel would call to check in. Sometimes he wouldn't. Emily rarely spoke more than a few sentences to me anymore. Still, I tried to help. I cleaned, cooked, ironed, but every act of love began to feel like intrusion. One morning, I was folding laundry when Emily walked in. She looked uncomfortable. "Mom, I know you're trying to help, but I'd appreciate it if you didn't touch our clothes. I like to do them myself." Her voice wasn't harsh, but it broke something in me. I nodded, forcing a smile, and quietly folded the last towel. When she left the room, I sat there for a while, staring at my hands. The same hands that once bathed Daniel as a baby. The same hands that had worked, bled, and trembled to give him everything. And now, they had no purpose. The final crack came one evening during dinner. We were sitting at the table, the three of us. Emily mentioned they were thinking about taking a trip. "Oh, how nice," I said. "Where are we going?" There was silence. Then Daniel said carefully, "Actually, Mom, we were thinking of going just the two of us. Kind of a couple's trip." "Oh," I said, nodding. "Of course." I smiled, but my spoon shook slightly against the bowl. After dinner, I went to my room and sat by the window. The streetlights outside blurred through the glass, and I realized the little boy who once promised I'd never be alone was now a man trying to find his own life. I couldn't blame him. I had raised him to be strong, independent, capable of love, but I hadn't prepared myself for what that would cost me. Background, soft. That night, as I lay in bed, I remembered something my mother once said to me. "Children are like birds. You raise them, feed them, and then one day they fly. You don't get to keep them. You only get to love them while they stay." I didn't understand her then. Now I do. Still, knowing the truth doesn't make the silence easier to bear. Every morning after that, I woke up earlier, trying to make myself invisible, moving quietly, staying out of the way. I told myself it was just a phase, that Emily would soften, that Daniel would see. But instead, the house grew quieter. And every day, the space between mother and son, once small enough to cross with a hug, began to feel like miles. Some moments in life don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, like the sound of a door closing softly or the rain beginning to fall.
For me, that moment came on an ordinary afternoon in early autumn. The air was cool, and the light through the window carried that golden hue that makes everything feel peaceful, even when it isn't. Daniel had gone to work. Emily was upstairs, tidying the bedroom. I was in the kitchen, making soup, chicken and vegetable, Daniel's favorite since he was little. As I stirred the pot, I hummed a tune, something I used to sing when he was a baby. The smell filled the house, warm and comforting. For a moment, it almost felt like old times. But then I heard footsteps behind me. Emily stood in the doorway, arms crossed gently, her face thoughtful but tense. "Mom," she said softly, "can we talk for a minute?" I turned off the stove and wiped my hands on a towel. "Of course, dear. What's wrong?" She hesitated, looking down before meeting my eyes. "You know we love you, right? You've done so much for Daniel, for both of us." Her voice trembled slightly, as if she didn't want to sound unkind. "I know, sweetheart. I love you both too." She sighed. "It's just, things have been a little tense lately. I feel like we don't have our own space anymore. It's affecting the house, our routines, even our marriage." Her words hung in the air like cold smoke. I didn't know what to say. She went on, choosing each word carefully. "I think maybe it would be good if you stayed somewhere else for a while, just until things settle." For a moment, I couldn't move. I just stood there, holding the dish towel, watching her face, kind but distant. I tried to speak, but my throat tightened. "Does Daniel agree with this?" She looked down again. "We talked about it. He thinks it might be best for everyone."
That was the moment my heart cracked, but I didn't let her see it. Instead, I smiled. That same small, tired smile I had learned to wear when the world became too heavy. "All right," I said softly. "If that's what you both think is best." She looked relieved. "Thank you for understanding. We really just need a bit of breathing room." I nodded, turning back to the stove. The soup was still simmering, steam rising quietly. It felt strange, standing there in the middle of a house I had helped build, knowing I was no longer part of it. That evening, Daniel came home. He tried to act normal, talked about work, asked if I'd eaten, but there was something careful in his tone, something guilty in the way he avoided my eyes. After dinner, he sat with me on the porch. The air smelled like rain and cut grass. "Mom," he began, his voice low, "I know this is hard. Emily didn't mean to upset you. It's just she's been feeling overwhelmed." I nodded. "I understand, Daniel. You don't have to explain." He looked at me, his eyes filled with conflict. "I thought maybe you could stay with Aunt Rose for a bit. She's been asking about you anyway." I smiled faintly. "Aunt Rose? She's nearly 80, Daniel." He chuckled softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know, but she'd love the company." I looked out at the streetlight flickering at the end of the road. "So, you think I should go?" He hesitated. Then quietly, he said, "Just for a while." That night, I packed my things, slowly, quietly, so they wouldn't hear.
A few clothes, my old kettle, the chipped teacup, and a small photo of Daniel as a child, missing his 2 front teeth, smiling like the world was his. Every item I packed carried a piece of my heart.
When I closed the suitcase, I sat on the bed and stared at the empty walls. The room still smelled like lavender and laundry soap, like home. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. After so many years of loss and rebuilding, maybe I had learned to survive by not breaking too loudly. The next morning, Daniel helped carry my suitcase to the car. Emily stood by the porch, trying to smile, her hands folded nervously. I told her, "Take care of him. He forgets to eat when he's tired." She nodded, whispering, "I will." Daniel hugged me, tight but quick. "I'll visit soon, Mom. I promise." "I know you will," I said, forcing a smile. "Drive safe to work." As the car pulled out of the driveway, I turned back to look at the house one last time. The curtains fluttered slightly, like a quiet wave goodbye. The home I had helped fill with warmth and laughter now stood silent, its walls holding memories that no one else would remember. When I arrived at Aunt Rose's, she welcomed me with open arms. Her little house smelled of lemon polish and old books. She was kind, and she didn't ask many questions. For that, I was grateful. The first few days passed slowly. I kept expecting a call from Daniel, maybe just to check if I'd arrived safely. But the phone stayed quiet. I told myself he was busy. I told myself he'd call tomorrow. Tomorrow became a week, then a month. One evening, Aunt Rose found me sitting by the window, staring out at the street. "You miss him," she said softly. I nodded. "He used to call every day. Now I don't even know if he's eating properly." She smiled gently. "You did your job, dear. You raised him well. Sometimes love means stepping back." I sighed. I just wish I knew if he still needed me. She placed a hand over mine. "Children never stop needing their mothers, dear. They just forget how to show it sometimes." Her words comforted me, but only for a moment. Weeks later, Daniel finally called. His voice was cheerful but distant, like someone speaking from another room. "Hey, Mom, how's that Rose treating you?" "She's lovely," I said. "How are you? How's Emily?" "She's good, busy with work." There was a pause. I wanted to ask when I could come home, but the words felt heavy on my tongue. So instead I said, "That's good. I'm happy you're both doing well." He hesitated, then said, "We'll come visit soon, okay?" I smiled even though he couldn't see it. "I'll be here." When the call ended, I sat in the quiet room, the phone still warm in my hand. I realized that his voice, once so familiar, now sounded like someone I used to know. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went out to the porch, wrapped in a shawl, and looked up at the stars. The air was cold, and I thought about the thousands of nights I had stayed awake for him, through fevers, exams, heartbreaks. Now all I could do was look at the same sky and hope he was safe somewhere beneath it. I whispered into the night, "Take care of him, Lord, even if he forgets to call." The wind carried my words away, and I sat there for a long time, until the stars began to fade and the world turned pale with morning. That was the night I stopped waiting for a call that never came. It wasn't anger that filled me,
just an aching quietness, the kind that settles deep inside and never truly leaves. Sometimes, love doesn't end in a fight. Sometimes it just fades, like a candle that burns too long and forgets it's running out of wax.
We'll stay with the mother as she learns to live in quiet acceptance, finds small joys again, and slowly opens her heart to forgiveness, even without hearing the words she longed for. Days turned into weeks, and weeks slipped into months. Life in Aunt Rose's house became my new rhythm. Slow, simple, quiet. Every morning, I made tea in my chipped cup, the same one I'd carried from Daniel's house. I'd sit by the window and watch the light move across the garden. There was comfort in that small routine, the kind that comes when you stop waiting for something and start noticing what's still around you. Aunt Rose was gentle company. She'd hum old hymns while watering her plants and talk about the neighbors in whispers, as though every detail was a secret meant only for the two of us. We became each other's quiet anchors. In the evenings, we'd sit on the porch with blankets around our shoulders, sipping tea and listening to the wind rustle through the trees. Sometimes she'd say, "You know, dear, love never really disappears. It just changes shape." And I would nod, even though I was still learning what that meant. It was during one of those rainy afternoons that I found an old photo album. It had been tucked away in my suitcase, buried beneath sweaters and scarves. I opened it slowly. There he was, my Daniel. From the day he was born, wrapped in a tiny blue blanket, his eyes barely open. Then his first birthday, his first day at school, his graduation. Page after page, I saw a story of love, mine and his, captured in smiles and moments that time had already taken back. I ran my fingers over the photos and whispered, "I did my best, my boy. I hope you know that." Tears finally came then, quiet, steady like the rain outside. Not from anger, not even from sadness, but from release. Because for the first time, I allowed myself to grieve not for what I lost, but for what had already gone long before I noticed. As the months went on, I began to help Aunt Rose with small things: grocery shopping, cooking, tidying the garden. Neighbors started waving to me, inviting me to join their little gatherings. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't used to laughter anymore. But one Saturday, the lady next door, Margaret, knocked on the door holding a plate of cookies. "We're having a tea morning at the community hall tomorrow," she said with a bright smile. "You and Rose should come." Aunt Rose nudged me gently. "Go on, dear. It'll be good for you." So I went. The hall was warm and full of chatter. Old friends catching up, children running between tables, music playing softly in the background. I sat quietly at first, unsure how to join in. But then someone asked about my cookies, the ones I'd baked the night before, and suddenly I was laughing again, sharing recipes, telling little stories about Daniel when he was small. For a moment, I forgot the heaviness in my chest. For a moment, I just belonged. When I got home that afternoon, Aunt Rose smiled knowingly. "You see, the world hasn't stopped for you. You just had to step back into it." And she was right. Life hadn't ended when Daniel closed his door. It had only changed direction. Around Christmas, I received a card in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable. It was from Daniel. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a photo: Daniel, Emily,
and a small baby girl smiling up at the camera. Below it, a short note. Mom, I hope you're doing well. We wanted you to meet our daughter. Her name is Lily. Emily says she has your eyes. We think of you often. Love, Daniel.
I read it over and over, tracing my fingers across the baby's tiny face. A grandchild I hadn't known. A mix of emotions flooded me. Joy, sadness, longing. I wanted to hold that baby, to whisper lullabies like I once did to her father. But more than anything, I felt something new. Forgiveness. Not because they had asked for it, but because holding on to hurt had kept me stuck in the past. And I realized that if I wanted peace, I had to let the silence mean something softer. That night, I wrote back, "My dear Daniel and Emily, thank you for the photo. Lily is beautiful. I'm so happy for you both. Please tell her that her grandmother loves her, even from afar. I hope one day we can share a cup of tea together again. With love always, Mom." I didn't expect a reply. Sometimes writing the words is enough. Sometimes it's the act of love itself that heals you. The seasons turned. Aunt Rose fell ill that spring. Nothing sudden, just the slow fading that comes with age. I took care of her as best I could, making her soups, reading her stories, holding her hand when she grew too tired to speak. One evening, as the sun set, she looked at me and whispered, "You'll be all right, you know. You've got a heart that keeps on loving." She passed away that night, peacefully in her sleep. I cried quietly, not just for losing her, but for everything she had helped me remember. That love, even when broken, still matters. After Aunt Rose's funeral, I stayed in her house. It felt natural almost, as if I was meant to keep it alive. The neighbors helped, bringing meals and small gifts. Slowly, I made it my own, filled it with plants, soft curtains, and photos of everyone I had loved. One morning, while I was tending to the roses in the garden, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Mom?" I froze. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, but when I turned, there he was, Daniel, standing by the gate, holding a little girl in his arms. She had big brown eyes, and yes, they looked like mine. I couldn't move. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, "Daniel?" He smiled nervously. "I hope it's okay we came." Before I could answer, the little girl reached out her tiny hand and said, "Grandma?" My heart broke open in the gentlest way. I knelt down and took her in my arms, holding her close. She smelled of baby powder and sunshine, the smell of forgiveness. Daniel's voice was soft. "I am sorry, Mom. I should have called. I shook my head before he could finish. "No, my boy," I said quietly. "We both did what we thought was right, and we both learned what it cost." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I missed you," he whispered. "I missed you too. But you came back. That's what matters." We spent the afternoon together in the garden. Emily joined us later, holding a basket of fruit, her smile shy but genuine. There were no big apologies, no heavy words, just laughter, small talk, and the sound of Lily's giggles as she chased butterflies. For the first time in a long while, the silence between us wasn't painful.
It was peaceful. After they left, I sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the trees. I felt a warmth inside me, not the kind that comes from being needed, but from knowing that love, once planted, never really dies. It just grows roots in unexpected places.
I thought of all those nights I'd spent worrying, wondering if he'd ever come back. And I smiled, realizing that love doesn't always return in the way you imagine. Sometimes it comes back quietly, holding a child who calls you grandma. That night, I made myself a cup of tea. As I sat by the window, watching the lights of the neighborhood flicker on, I whispered. I raised him alone, and he found his way back. In silence, yes, but also in love. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I never really had been. The house is quiet now, but in a way that feels alive. I can hear the faint hum of the street lights, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the soft clink of my teacup on the saucer. Some evenings I sit by the window and think about the years that passed, the small victories, the long nights, the moments I thought I would never survive. I remember Daniel as a boy, laughing barefoot in the sunlight. I remembered the empty rooms after he grew up. I remembered the silence when he left. And yet, I don't feel bitter. Not anymore. Life is strange that way. It teaches you that love isn't always about closeness. Sometimes it's about letting go. Sometimes it's about giving without expecting return. Sometimes it's about trusting that even when someone walks away, your love can carry them safely, even from afar. I think about Lily, my granddaughter, and how she reminds me of everything I once held close. Her small hand in mine is more than a connection to Daniel. It's a promise that life goes on, that joy can be found again, and that hearts can heal in ways we never imagined. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't always require words. It doesn't need apologies or explanations. It's simply a choice to release the hurt, to honor the love, and to allow the heart to breathe again. Sometimes when the evening light falls across the garden, I can almost hear Daniel laughing again. The sound of my boy who once ran through the living room chasing sunlight. And I smile quietly because he's still there in my memory, still there in my heart, and now, in a new way, still in my life. I look out at the street, at the homes lining the quiet suburb, and I feel peace. The life I built alone, the boy I raised with care, the family I watched grow, all of it has shaped me. I am stronger than I knew. I am softer than I thought. I am loved, even when it is different from what I imagined. I sip my tea, warm in my hands, and I whisper softly to the evening, love is never wasted. It only changes shape. It lives in the quiet moments, in the memories, in the hearts that carry it forward. And for the first time in many years, I feel a gentle joy. Not loud, not demanding, just steady and calm. I raised him alone, yes, but through it all, I never truly lost him. And in that truth, I have found everything I need. The night falls, the house is quiet, and I am at peace.